In this video, we're going to look at how to set up and use the aggregate component in Matillion ETL. Aggregate functions offer data professionals single output insights that can add significant value and meaning to their data. The aggregate component works by grouping together multiple input rows into a single output row. Input columns can be added to the groupings or have aggregation applied to them. There are multiple aggregation types you can use in the aggregation component. For example, count counts the amount of rows in a particular column. Sum adds together all the values in a particular column. Min and max return the lowest and highest values in a particular column, respectively. Average calculates the average of a group of selected values. In this example job, we'll use the count function to return a count of the number of cancelled flights and the total number of flights in a year. To add an aggregate component to your job, drag it onto the canvas from the component dropdown. You can find the aggregate component under Components, Data, Transform, or by typing aggregate into the search bar. In this example, a table input component is used to read data from an existing table. The data it reads can be manipulated to your needs using Matillion ETL transformation components. In this case, the aggregate component. We can view this untransformed data by selecting the table input component and clicking on the sample tab, then refresh data. Here you'll be presented with a sample of the data. Then connect the table input component to the aggregate component. First, we'd recommend changing the name of the aggregate component to something meaningful, so it's easy to identify. For our example, we'll call it cancelled flights. To configure the aggregation, first we need to define the source column or columns that will form the groupings. To do this, navigate to the Properties tab and double-click on Groupings. The columns available for aggregation vary depending on the table selected in the table input component. Once the connection between the components validates, the columns in your chosen table will be available in the aggregate component. Next, select the columns that you want to group your data by in the left-hand column and press the right arrow button to add them. For this example, we want the total number of cancelled flights per year, meaning we need to select the column Year for the grouping. The output will contain one row for each distinct combination of values within the grouping columns. Next, we need to define the aggregation functions you want to apply: count, sum, average, etc. Double-click on Aggregations, then press the plus icon to add a row. Under Source column, select the column that you want to aggregate. And under the aggregation type, choose the type of aggregation you want to perform. For this example, we'll select a source column of cancelled and an aggregation type of sum. This will return the number of all cancelled flights. Then click OK. Now we can check the aggregation has worked by looking at a sample of the data. Navigate to the Sample tab, then press the Refresh Data button. The columns displayed in the sample are the selected grouping columns, followed by the newly aggregated column. Note that default output names are chosen by combining the source column name and the aggregation type. If the name provided is not appropriate, consider using a rename component immediately after this component to choose more appropriate output column names. Also, if you're using the aggregate component on Matillion for Snowflake, there is an additional property called grouping type. This provides further flexibility when grouping your data. Grouping types are an extension of the group by clause in SQL. For more information on the grouping types, visit the Matillion support site. You can add multiple aggregations to the same aggregate component. We can set up a second aggregation within the same component to achieve this. Navigate back to the Properties tab and open the aggregations again. Press the plus button to add a second row. Then, for the source column, we'll select the column flight num. Then, for the aggregation type, we'll select count. Then click OK. To see these changes in the data, navigate back to the Sample tab and click the Refresh Data button. The aggregate component can be used to group multiple columns. For example, if we wanted the same breakdown of total cancelled flights by year and month. To do this, navigate back to the Properties tab and select Groupings. We can add the second grouping by selecting it in the left-hand column and pressing the right arrow button. Now, if we refresh the sample data again, we can see the cancelled and total flights grouped by year and month. For full documentation on the aggregate component, you can go to the Help tab or visit the Matillion support site.